Lisa Hurwitz.
No offense taken whatsoever, because I know that you've been sitting for a really long time now. If you want to go use the restroom or stretch your legs, I really am not going to be able. I promise you.
Before we start our conversation, I would like to note that Lisa is being awarded the Clio Visualizing History Prize for the advancement of women in film. And I have a statement that I'd like to read from Lola Van Wagenen, who is the benefactor of this prize and has been for several years. The Clio Visualizing History Prize for the advancement of women in film has been a delight to create and award these past several years. And I'm pleased to give the prize tonight to Lisa Hurwitz for her outstanding film, The Automat. One of the things this film does so beautifully is truly visualize history with its use of great archival sources. And the film also traces cultural history over time through the life cycle of the Automat. This film also shows Lisa's persistence, a good lesson for new filmmakers. Figuring out people who probably Ada Born and Hard Art is a big deal, and then tracking down well-known people and convincing them to be interviewed was a remarkable accomplishment for a new filmmaker. And I love some of the humor. Leaving in the shot where she is fixing Cullen Powell's button was smart and clever. The Automat is a most deserving recipient of our prize, and I wish Lisa great success with the film. Like to thank and welcome and note Lola, who is here with us tonight, for making this prize possible. Lola. I want to note that Lola's work committed to history, but in particular the cultural reference points in history, which really, without which history does not have meaning, is very apropos to this award, but also to the work that Lola does here in Vermont, and we really appreciate that as well. So,
before you start, I just want to say that Lisa won't be here for closing night, so we are presenting her, thank you very much, she won't be here for closing night, so we're presenting her with the V-Teddy tonight, and we are grateful that you're here, and we hope you find a nice spot for that V-Teddy going forward.
Wow. So, a little conversation here and then open up for some questions from the audience. This appears to me to be a monumental undertaking to assemble this material and to, frankly, mobilize the resources to make it possible. I know that stock footage, for one thing, would be extremely costly, in addition to just the work of tracking it down and putting all the pieces together. So, how long did it take you to make this film? Let's start there.
The process began in 2013 and continued in my spare time up until the film finally premiered at the 2021 Telluride Film Festival. The film was supposed to premiere at the 2020 Telluride Film Festival, which was canceled due to COVID.
Yeah. Okay, so 7 years, 8 years of constant work. So what was the inspiration? What put you on this long, arduous path through which I'm sure you made loads of money and had many assistants working full-time.
I was a college student at the time that this all began. I was eating constantly in our cafeteria, which I loved. It was one of my favorite, you know, joys of the day. I was curious to know more about where cafeterias came from because I wasn't familiar with them as a dining format. And in our school library, I came across the Automat either in a book or in an article, and I was volunteering at our local movie palace while I was a student as a 35mm projectionist. I went on to then be employed by them, paid staff, and making the film really combined these two interests of mine, the cafeteria and film. But I wasn't intending to make this when I began that. It was sort of more of a little pet project, you know, very low pressure, something for fun, and it, you know, evolved over time, and I never would have imagined that this was what it was going to become.
How did that evolution take place? I mean, were there turning points? Was there encouragement? Was there grant money? I mean, what sort of built momentum for you then?
Well, I'd say a big piece of like funding momentum was when we had our successful Kickstarter campaign. It not only gave us a big financial boost, but it established a base of support. You know, people who became our cheerleaders, people who helped out in other, you know, non-financial ways, and it, you know, helped get the word out that we were making this film.
Do you mind my asking you what the goal of your Kickstarter campaign was?
I think the goal might have been 50,000, or, and then we, you know, we did a bit more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's an extremely important source for mobilizing support for independent filmmakers.
It is. We live in a country that doesn't fund independent filmmaking as much as others.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, we can talk about that. All right. So.
Yeah, lately I've been kind of obsessed with HBO Max announced last week that they were really cutting their acquisitions team in order to focus on original content, which has been a trend across all the platforms, and it's very concerning to me as a documentary filmmaker because having gone through this process, I think that it can be a really beautiful thing for someone who's a first-time filmmaker or somebody who's not, you know, as established as a filmmaker to be able to make a documentary on their own time, their own terms. I think it can come out very magical in that way.
Right.
And it used to be much more likely that you could sell your film at the end of that process for a respectable price, and that only happens now for a handful of films every year.
Right. Yeah.
Because the focus now is on original content.
It's extremely difficult. We touched briefly before the screening about, you know, the challenges to independent filmmakers of the monopoly streaming effect.
Yeah. And I felt that as well, because, you know, despite all of the celebrities that are in this film, I wasn't able to make that respectable sale. So instead, I'm self-distributing the film, and I've made a lot of deals, but they're, you know, I've piecemealed the thing instead of, you know, selling the film all to one place that would handle everything.
And this would seem to be a natural. It's a film that should play art house theaters. It's a film that should have a decent television premiere.
And it played theatrically in over 100 theaters around the country. I organized it, and it's going to play on a very big television channel, and I organized that too. Well, so
congratulations.
Thank you. It's not impossible to, I think, achieve those things that a big distributor or a streamer now, because we're now streamers are distributors too. It's not impossible to pull that off on an individual level. It's just a lot of work, and you know, the amount of money it's not going to be the same, but you can get close.
I mean, there's so many questions explore on all of this. Maybe just, I want to touch, maybe we'll come back to some of the technical stuff of just getting the stock footage and getting Mel Brooks to agree, you know, just things like that. But thematically, what did you discover in this process, and was it a discovery? And what did you find that surprised you or was unexpected?
Well, something that I've just been constantly surprised by in the release of the film is how this film feels like the gift that keeps giving. You know, here we are almost a year after the film premiered, and you know, we're still playing in some theaters. We're still getting invited to film festivals. My travel schedule for all of these events is still really hectic. I can't believe that it's still going, and that kind of momentum and reception that the film's been getting. It feels really, you know, it's been a big confidence booster, this whole experience, because, you know, of course, you know, I did it because it gave me joy to do it, but then to, you know, see that, you know, people actually like it, and that, you know, I doubt this will ever happen again for another film I do, but yearly it had, you know, it's 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, you know, only a couple of critics, I've only seen a couple critics, you know, really criticize it harshly, so, you know, it's just wild. So I'm really surprised by the reception of the film.
I think there are many different angles that you can go at the film. I mean, it's history, but it's also a very rich articulation of culture for this period of time. I mean, Mel Brooks at one point calls it an experiment. Well, last film's 100 years. But in looking at the social dynamics and looking at the economic aspects of it, the access that people had, the fact that it was racially integrated to go there, that it was not a place during that whole period that locked it down and became segregated. The fact that that it valued quality not only of food but of setting, the physical presence of this place. It was a classy place to be, with marble floors, and marble tables, and brass, you know, gargoyles dispensing your coffee. And that notion that you can invest in a high-quality experience for working people and poor people and wealthy people alike to go and be. And in fact, those people did go and be there across the board. I mean, so it's more than, for me, you know, a journey into nostalgia. It also is an important cultural, sociological, historical perspective that we lose sight of very easily.
Absolutely. And one of the takeaways that, and I'm very pleased that, you know, we don't really push our ideologies down anyone's throats with this film. People can, like, come to their own conclusions at the end, and everyone takes away something different. But for sure, this was a business that was providing something incredible for the public. It provided dignity to everyone who wanted to be there, and they provided that at a very affordable price, and they treated people well. People treated each other well in there. Whether businesses today can, you know, behave in this way, you know, I don't know the answer to that. Of course, you know, we can't have, you know, 5-cent coffee anymore and yada yada, but, you know, can businesses provide their customers with things that are good for them and affordable for them, that are, you know, innovative? Because even though it was a restaurant, it was a very innovative one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a vision that seemed to drive it. Let me ask one more question and see if the audience has something that they would like to ask. I'm sure they do. So just basically, how did you get Mel Brooks and Colin Powell? And was he still, did you interview him? Colin Powell? He was still Secretary of State.
I did the interviews, and he was retired.
Oh, he was retired. Okay. You mentioned the MS or Columbia, and I was starting to say, how long did this movie really take? But okay, so how did you approach these people?
Well, everybody sort of had a different path to how I came to them. There were a couple of commonalities. Both Elliot Gould and Mel Brooks sort of, and then I guess Carl Reiner, came through this theater that I was working at during college because I eventually started working there. I was in charge of converting our theater from 35mm to digital cinema. I had to lead the fundraising campaign, and I reached out to Elliot Gould to see if he would sort of be our spokesperson in a way and come up to Washington State and do fundraisers with us. And so we filmed his Automat interview then because I had the opportunity to ask him, did you ever go to the Automat? And Mel Brooks had a friend who was a guest of our theater. We were showing Jaws 3D, and so Carl Gottlieb was there, and I was in charge of, driving him around town, and we became Facebook friends. So eventually, he saw my Kickstarter pop up into his Facebook newsfeed, and he wrote me a Facebook message saying, I didn't know you were a filmmaker and that you were doing a project about the Automat. It was such a special place for me when I was young. I'm having dinner with my friend Mel Brooks tonight. Do you mind if I mention the project? That was how Mel became involved, and then immediately, as soon as I was in touch with Mel's team, he said, I'm going to get you Carl Reiner. And I didn't even ask for that. He just, you're going to get Carl Reiner too. So, and I was actually supposed to interview them together. We had like a just like how you and I are sitting right now. The shot was set for 2 people, but Mel was running late and Carl was getting restless. So Carl just plopped down and said, "Start rolling. You're gonna do me alone." Which
was great because it actually plays back and forth nicely.
Yeah, and Mel said that that's one of his favorite things about the film is the reaction between him and Carl. And also, I think that Mel's interview would have been very different had the 2 of them been, sitting together. Carl had Carl went to the Automat a lot, but his, it plays a very special place in the heart of Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
For Carl Reiner, it wasn't as, important.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I'm writing a memoir actually. Who knows if I'm going to get completed, but the Automat shows up on page 4. It's interesting. I grew up around Philadelphia.
Okay.
Also, just one other question. I once made a film with some stock footage, and I had to pay like $92 a second for stock footage from any of the networks.
Oh wow, $92. You said $92?
A second.
A second.
For stock footage.
That's very low.
Very low. And $10,000 minimum for any clip from a motion picture.
Right.
Now, $92.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
So, based on that, there would be hundreds of thousands of dollars of licensing that would be required for this.
It's possible since the time that you made this film of yours that fair use law has rapidly become more filmmaker friendly.
Okay.
And I think even during the course of making this film, it improved a lot in the favor of the filmmaker.
Right.
I was able to work with a fair use lawyer. Of course, he was very particular. I had to make a lot of edits based on his feedback. We only could use, you'll see that with the exception of candid camera, which I did actually license because my editor really likes candid camera. If you wanted to, we had a lot of candid camera. And the Funt family was very generous, and they really helped me out. But everything else, I think, in terms of the old Hollywood movies, we fair use that, but we could only use a few seconds, and we had to use them in a context to, really demonstrate our point.
Yeah.
And things got shortened that I would have liked. Here's just one example. We had the Flintstones in there very briefly, and it only showed him walking into the Rockomat. But it gets even better once he gets in the Rockomat.
Sure.
Because, they're like getting dinosaurs out of the little automatic. Very long bones. And my lawyer was like, okay, you can't have both. You can either have told you how the theater that I worked at played a role.
Right.
And I also became the director of that town's film festival, which we ran in the theater. But Ruth Ginsburg and Colin Powell, I found them on a Wikipedia list of famous people from New York. I was going through that list with a highlighter, who I thought would be a good interview. And I just started reaching out to people to ask them if they ever went to the Automat. And so I sent a letter in the mail to the U.S. Supreme Court with Ruth's name on it. And I sent a letter in the mail to Colin Powell's fan mail address, which I found online.
Sure.
So he sent me letters back in the mail.
Unbelievable. You are exemplary as an independent filmmaker. Absolutely.
Once I heard about Howard Schultz's dedication to the Automat in one of his memoirs, I was able to get to him pretty easily because I was living in Seattle at the time, and you know the Seattle Jewish world is kind of tight-knit, so it was pretty easy to get him. Even though he's, I know, like CEO of Starbucks, like everybody Jewish there is connected to him by it. But also, I'm going to be at the party afterwards, so if anyone wants to, ask me questions there, I'm happy to, talk to everyone.
Yes. Well, do we have one or two questions from the audience now that they would like to ask? Yes.
So I was very fortunate to see a work in progress, and I forgot the year, many, many years ago, a work in progress. So this is the first time I've seen the film, and I was just really stunned by the story crafting. And so I was just so curious how you took what I saw as your work in progress and really honed down into the emotion. And so I guess, what was your story crafting process and did you work with the editor and the volumes of transcripts you must have had to go through and comb through to find the heart of the story? So I just love to hear about that.
Good question.
Well, I do think that since that work in progress, you saw that at that point I had a supervising editor who was sort of overseeing me and my friends, and eventually my supervising editor, we just realized that he was going to need to be an editor because it was too, it wasn't going to do the film justice for me and my friends to edit it. And we ended up we have two editors of the film in addition to me and my friends who are credited as, assistant editors. But I did work closely with my editors if they were looking, I need Colin Powell to say something really emotional, for example, like send me your favorite lines of his. And, we would go back and forth, but, it's messy. It's really messy, and it took years, but in the end, and I stopped, I did even pause, my editor didn't like that I wanted to bring a second editor on, but, I saw that we were missing something, and, I took my time and I waited until I felt like it was right. It really didn't feel like until close to the end, like, okay, now I'm feeling really happy about this. I think we're almost done. I was very critical of the film. Now I love it. But,
that's what it takes.
it's really messy. It's not a quick, yeah.
One more question. Anybody else?
I would be at the party.
Yeah. Well, I just think, is this your first film?
It is my first, and I know to be here, it's either got to be your first or your
Yes,
second.
be first or second.
It's my first.
Maybe it's your second, but
Yeah.
I mean,
So I guess that means I can come back.
you can come back with your next film. Thank you so much, Lisa, for making this fabulous film, for taking this long trip to be here, and for being so candid in responses. So, great to see you.